Alright, what's up my friends? Welcome to the complete set review for Murders at Karlov Manor. Like, comment, subscribe, hit the button, support the channel, do the things. We got a complete set review for you. Every card, every color, constructed and limited. Now, it's important to note, the list cards are going to be relevant for limited, as well as historic and timeless on Arena. That'll be in a separate video, because it's just kind of confusing, honestly. But we're doing every card in the main set today. Going in Wooburg order, white, blue, black, red, green. We'll have the multicolor section, we'll have the colorless and land section, and then of course it'll all be up on YouTube for anything you missed. We're doing it live on stream right now, which is great. It's here for our wonderful audience, right? And we're gonna start with white as we always do. Good place to start. I want to remind you, of course, Bronze to Mythic will be starting on Wednesday, the 7th. Brand new draft format, brand new drafting. Check it out, Bronze Mythic. Make sure you follow me on the YouTube and the Twitch for Bronze Mythic. And we'll check that out. It's going to be very, very exciting. But let's get right in and just do our thing. Starting out with Absolving Lam Mas.
You're saying it wrong.
I think I'm saying it right. 5 mana for a 4/3 flying. This is an uncommon. When ETBs, all suspected creatures are no longer suspected. So, as we always do, we're going to go over all the mechanics as we see them, and our first mechanic is suspected. So, it's a pretty simple one, honestly. So, if a creature is suspected, it has menace, and it can't block. There can be multiple creatures suspected, and there are effects that care about things being suspected, as well as things that can remove or add being suspected. So, again, this card comes into play. It removes all suspicion from all creatures. And then when it dies, you gain 3 life and you suspect a creature and opponent controls. So, suspect can be both a benefit and a drawback. So, for example, if you give your own creature a menace, it's harder to block. So, like, it can be a bit of an upside in that regard. Also, you can give it to your opponent's creatures and they can't block with it. So, they have a 1/4, give it menace so it can't block, which is kind of cool as well. And again, there are also things as well going on as far as that goes. So, but this is obviously a limited card, 5 mana for a 4/3 flyer. When it dies, you gain 3 life, which is pretty good also. And then, as far as adding and removing suspecting, not really like a clear path for this in limited, but overall, just solid limited card. Just a 4/3 flyer. When it dies, you gain 3 life is very, very solid for the floor, and the rate's reasonable. And then we'll keep an eye on our suspect cards as far as what's going on with that. Up next is Assemble the Players.
It's a trap.
We got our trap card, folks. Starting out real early here. 2 mana for a rare enchantment. You may look at the top card of your library at any time. And then once per turn, that horrible, horrible, horrible line, once per turn, you may cast a creature spell with power 2 or less from the top of your library. So, I think this card looks very, very appealing, right? We love playing cards off the top of our library, you know, Future Sight, Experimental Frenzy. Just the feel of just like pop, go, pop, go, pop, go is awesome. But again, only once per turn limits the output here. So at most, this is 1 card a turn. It is kind of cool if you were playing flash creatures. You could, in theory, play like a creature on your turn, creature on their turn. But then you just hit a land. You can't cast anything, right? So the problem with this card is that none of the value is front-loaded. So you spend 2 mana. You've got nothing. Now you need to like hit the conditions, actually have a castable card on top, and then cast it. And then you hit the condition again and cast another one. And now you've gotten to 2 mana, draw 2 cards, which is like a floor. You know, like 2 mana, draw 2 cards is like fine, you know. But it's a lot of work to even get there. And then getting the exponential value of like, you know, 3 cards, 4 cards, 5 cards, the real ceiling is difficult. It requires that many turns to do so. So this card seems like a really cool card for like creature combo decks, maybe like Amalia and Pioneer or stuff like that. You know, but the reality is that you just need to build your deck a certain way, and it's very capped. The ceiling here isn't very high, and the floor is pretty low also. You know, you play this thing, top card's a land, crap, you know, and then next time up over, it's another copy of Assemble the Players, crap, you know. So I think this card is pretty miserable. It probably will find a very niche home in certain spots, but again, also because all of your creatures need to have power 2 or less, or it doesn't work either. So a lot of work for not a lot of payoff. Again, very low ceiling. I think we'll see a little bit of play, but overall, just not very exciting. A card that looks very appealing, though. So Assemble the Players is my trap card. In limited, this card's great, I think, because the games obviously go longer. Great to stretch. I think this card's good. The power 2 or less is a theme in black and white in limited. So obviously, it's not too hard to build around. But yeah, overall, not so great. That's my trap card for white. Assemble the Players. Up next is Aurelius Vindicator. The return of Morph, sort of. So we have a new mechanic here. This is a mythic, so it's not written out. But Disguise is effectively just Morph. And Morph's been enough sets where you should know what that is by now. Morph means to play a creature for 3 mana, face down as a 2/2. The difference is Disguise means the face down creature also has Ward 2. So a little harder to kill. So 2/2 for 3 with Ward 2, face down. Then you may flip it up at any time for its Disguise cost. So again, unmorph, undisguise, we'll figure out the nomenclature. And this is a mythic rare. Not a great place to start for explaining what Disguise is, but 4 mana for a 4/2 flying lifelink Ward 2. So decent body. And then whenever it's turned face up, the unmorph cost or Disguise cost is 4 plus X. Exile up to X other target creatures from the battlefield and or creature cards from graveyards. And then when it leaves the battlefield, those cards go back to their owner's hands. So this is very, very similar to Angel of Serenity from a ways back, where this is sort of like a temporary removal element that can also be card advantage. You can remove like their creature and then your good creature from the graveyard. And then when it dies, you get both back, which is kind of cool. And obviously, as a 4-power lifelink, it kind of needs to be killed. That being said, we're talking about sinking 3 mana to put it face down, and then at least 5 mana to go face up. So that's 8 mana overall, just to do one thing. So for constructed, morph cards were never particularly huge in constructed. There were some exceptions, obviously, Pickles and so on and so forth, Exalted Angel. But I think this one is probably mostly going to be a limited bomb. In limited, this card is ridiculously bonkers, obviously. It's removal, it's lifelink, it's everything, And then the ward on the morph means it's also kind of hard to kill a morph, We're used to morphs, in formats with cards like Shock or Deadweight, where if it's 1 mana way to kill a morph super easily, it's at least 3 mana or more to kill a morph. Unless, there's some uncounterable stuff, more on that later. So, busted limited card, very, very splashable. Constructed, probably not, but we'll see. Auspicious Arrival. 2 mana for an instant. Target gets +2/+2 until end of turn, and then Investigate. Who loves Investigate? Let's make some freaking clues. I absolutely adore clues. Investigate's a mechanic that simply means to make a clue token. A clue token is an artifact with 2 mana, sacrifice, draw a card. Clues are phenomenal. Absolutely awesome. We've seen clues, many times so far. Tie-House Tracker and Friends and so on and so forth. And clues are excellent in general, but especially phenomenal in limited. It's funny because in constructed and in limited, they're a little different. In limited, there's card advantage, which is phenomenal, obviously, because you want to have card advantage. And then in constructed, clues, they're not only card advantage, but they're also just artifacts. So you can, sacrifice them to Indomitable Creativity. You can sacrifice them to Shrapnel Blast. You can tap them for whatever. You can sacrifice them to Convoke or whatever it might be, So clues are very, very powerful. Do not underestimate them. This is a pretty solid combat trick. This sort of 2 mana +2/+2 effect is pretty mediocre in limited usually, but tacking on draw cards pretty good. That being said, there's a ceiling to how many of this card you can play. So I would classify this as a medium, medium minus limited trick. Better than your usual limited trick, but not particularly super exciting. So, mid to low pick, but a card you're not super unhappy to play. And yeah, not more than that really, but Investigate's back. That's freaking awesome. Call Surprise Witness. First off, timeout. This card not being an instant.
Give me what I want.
Are you freaking kidding me? The card called Call a Surprise Witness is not an instant. Whatever. Flavor judge aside, 2 mana for a sorcery. Return target creature card, mana value 3 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. Put a flying counter on it, and it's also a spirit. So, see this effect a lot. Currently have Helping Hands in Standard. Currently have Recommission, I think, which gives a +1/+1 counter. Giving flying is kind of cool, but these cards always play much worse than they look. Because, you just can play another threat. You don't need to have this card that, needs other cards to be good. And giving a flying counter isn't that much benefit. If this cost 1, I think it'd be in business. But overall, pretty unexciting card. It's fine limited. Obviously, flying is pretty good. But overall, not the most exciting. I think this card is going to be overplayed at first. And kind of people realize it's kind of eh. Case File Auditor, huh? You mana for a 1/4 creature human detective. When this ETBs... And whenever you solve a case, more on that later, look top 6 cards of your library. You may reveal an enchantment card from among them and put it in your hand. Put the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. So that's pretty good, honestly. So on ETB, top 6 get an enchantment. That's just card advantage, right? And the case cards are enchantments. We'll get to those in a little bit. But they can find any enchantment. It doesn't need to find a case. So even absent of cases existing at all, this is a 1/4 for 3 that ETBs and draws an enchantment. That's pretty cool. honestly, you know. And then it has mana of any color for casting case spells. That part's almost irrelevant. But this card's kind of sweet. There are still a lot of really good enchantment effects in the format from Kamigawa and stuff and so on and so forth. So there are a lot of good enchantments available, and the 1/4 body blocks pretty well. I think this card's a card that has an outside shot at constructed. In limited, it's kind of harder to have enough enchantments for this, but won't be that hard. And again, the fail state of a 1/4 for 3 is certainly reasonable. So reasonable limited card, possible constructed card. Pretty sweet though. Kind of a card you can easily sleep on, but this card's very, very solid. And speaking of cases, get out your sleuthing, your magnifying glass thing.
Hold on to your butt.
I don't know, whatever. And get your case going here. New card type, case, enchantment case. This is a 2-mana enchantment. So all case cards follow the same pattern. They are enchantments. They have 3 sections like a saga, but they do not go sequentially. So a top section happens immediately. You play a case card, top section happens every time. That's just what it does. Chapter 2 is the to solve section, where it's the condition that needs to be met to solve the case. Okay, so basically at the end of every turn, end of all of your turns, the case will check itself. Did I meet this requirement? If so, I am now solved. If not, I am not solved. Once it is solved, you have access to the 3rd chapter, which is just solved, do something, and then you're always on forever. So these meetings basically exist in two cases. They're either unsolved, 2 cases, either unsolved or solved, and you get some benefit initially and then more benefit by completing the case. So this one is, one of those ETBs, choose a creature you don't control. Each creature you control deals 1 damage to that creature. To solve this case, 3 or more creatures have to attack this turn. Again, it solves on your end step. And then when it is solved, it turns into a super anthem, or I guess a half super anthem, +1/+0 for all your creatures, period. So, pretty cool card. All right, this is obviously a phenomenal limited card. You just play this, you kill a creature, which is awesome. Maybe you flip it, maybe you don't, but even if you don't, it's still a removal spell. If you do flip it, awesome. That's great. So you have a solved case. This could play well in possible like invoke decks, decks playing a lot of tokens or whatever. Really good. Possible for this deck to see play in constructed for sure, and then obviously a solid limited card as well. For 2 mana, that's nice. That's pretty awesome. So pretty cool card. Case of the Gateway Express. Looking for it in both constructed and limited. Up next is Case of the Pilfered Proof. 2 mana for another case. Whenever a detective ETB is under your control, and whenever a detective is turned face up under your control, put a +1/+1 counter on it. So a preemptive sort of anthem for detectives, which is one of the themes, creature type themes in the set. To solve this, you have to control 3 or more detectives. Not too difficult, you know. And if it's solved, if 1 or more tokens to be made under your control, those tokens plus a clue token are created instead. So that's kind of cool, honestly. You know, again, there's a lot of detective things happening in limited. Blue-white, the theme in limited is going to be detectives, so like there'll be a lot of those coming around anyway. And once you solve this, it's not hard to solve anyway, right? It's like have the 3 things in play. It buffs all your stuff, and then it also makes clues randomly as well, which is kind of sweet if you're making tokens. The only problem with this card is that you got to play it on turn 2. Because you're going to play it before you start playing detectives. So it kind of turns turn 2 into like a vacuum where like you just don't affect the board really. That's kind of rough. So for constructive, this card's probably not there because of that. It's a huge downside. But in limited, this card seems very, very solid. Solid card for sure if you're playing detectives, playing blue-white, and then getting clues is great also. So again, too much of a black hole, instructed, but cool limited card. Up next is the Case of the Uneaten Feast. Sleeper card time. I like this card a lot, folks. 1 mana for a case, so super, super cheap. Does not have that problem where you're, you know, playing this card on turn 2 or 3 and not affecting the board. And this is a 1 mana enchantment. Whenever a creature ETBs, gain a life. So a Johnny's Welcome, I think it was called, which was a, you know, borderline playable card in life gain decks, right? To solve this, you've gained 5 or more life this turn. Not like super likely to happen, but certainly reasonable for sure. And then if it's solved, you get to sacrifice it, and all creature cards in your graveyard gain. You may cast this card from your graveyard until end of turn. So a very, very powerful effect, right? So you play this early. You're obviously playing this with life gain cards, Amalia, the Spirit that I forget the name of, unfortunately, if it gets a the Giant's Pride May kind of card. You know, there are a lot of like life gaining effects in standard right now, sort of incidentally. This plays really, really well with. You know, we've seen Luminarch Veteran seeing some play also. So Voice of the Blessed. So there is some, you know, desire to just have this life gain effect. And then at some point, you're just sort of like, oh, I just happened to gain 5 life this turn. Now the case is solved. And if we get Wrath or whatever, we can sack us and return things. Obviously, unfortunately, the best Wrath format is Sunfall, so it all exiles. But still, I think this card's a nice little sleeper card. I could easily be able to gloss over this card. I don't think it's constructed playable. I think it definitely is. Angels, life gain decks, things like that. Card's kind of sweet. You'll definitely be seeing this card in 10 new brews. That's for damn sure. Building a life gain deck, absolutely. In limited, this card's much worse. Because frankly, there isn't really any life gain synergy, so probably not really a limited card, but for constructed, absolutely. Defense-rated Phantom. I remember because defense rate was it's just defense rate means to go. Oh, I can explain it. So, common 6 mana 4/3 flyer. That's not very good, obviously. Also has disguise. It'll flip over for 5. Now, this is a good time to talk about the disguise rule or the morph rule, which I personally don't like very much. So old school, back in my day, in Onslaught, we used to have to walk uphill in the snow to the draft store. Morphs were just go nuts. Cards like a Zombie Cutthroat would flip for free for 5 life. Skirk Commando and Battering Craghorn are both 3 mana red commons that flip for 3. And one was the 3/1 first strike. And then one, if it hits you, it shocked the creature. So like, you have this like, do I block or not block? I'm screwed either way kind of thing. So WotC decided to do the morph rule in Construct here, meaning that you will never lose a combat with morphs for less than 5 mana. So if your opponent has 5 or more mana, they'll be able to flip up a thing that's larger than a 2/2. But otherwise, you're always safe to at least trade. So we see here, this is a 5 mana morph. It's a 4/3 flyer. This card looks like it was from Construct here, which is not a good thing at all. So the card looks pretty mediocre. Obviously, like a playable limited card, but pretty shitty. I would not be very happy with cards in my deck. If you need some way to win, sure. Probably a little better in sealed, but yeah. So that's the morph rule for y'all. Not thrilled about it. I think you can avoid the Battering Craghorn, Skirk Commando, like, I'm screwed if I do, screwed if I don't kind of thing. But I want a little more variety of morphs, whatever. Delaney Streetwise Lookout is next. This is a 3 mana mythic rare legendary human scout. It's 2/2 for 3. Creatures you control power 2 or less can't be blocked by creatures of power 3 or greater, so a mild evasive effect. But more importantly, it says if the ability of a creature you control with power 2 or less triggers, that ability triggers an additional time. So we've got a Panharmonicon for creatures power 2 or less, also a human. There's some cool stuff happening here, right? So this card can copy a Thalia's Lieutenant trigger and buff your team twice. This can copy a Barukathar and kill 2 creatures, right? Doesn't work very well with Adeline, I suppose. It keeps making tokens and making it bigger. But there's a lot of ways to double trigger here. The question is a 3 mana 2/2 reasonable? That's kind of the question, So this card has some potentials for sure. But overall, I don't know, honestly. This is my I don't know award for the set, where I don't know if a 2/2 for 3 with no protection is worth this effect. It is pretty powerful. But yeah, chat's listing off a million things you can do with this card. There are a million things you can do with this card, for sure. That being said, are they worth doing? I don't know. Does seem extremely good with Collected Company and some stuff too, but we'll see. I don't know. Card stays pretty sweet. This is a great limited card because the floor is reasonable and the ceiling's very high. But this is a card I'm looking forward to seeing more of because I don't know how it's going to work. It does a bajillion different things, and it's going to be kind of cool to play with. So probably might win the award for most interesting card in the set. But Delaney, Streetwise Lookout. Up next is Doorkeeper Thraw, and this is the card that's really, really good against our previous card. Doorkeeper Thraw is now perhaps one of the best hate bears in a lot of formats. 2 mana for a 1/2 flying flash. Artifacts, creatures, ETBing don't cause abilities to trigger. So this is like your absolute knockout card against goblins, humans, decks that rely on ETB triggers, and that's really, really annoying, honestly. Is it better than Hushbringer? I'm not sure, but having flash is pretty important because like your opponent can go for their ETB thing and you can just flash in and kind of stop it anyway. Does stop the protection trigger on the One Ring in Modern, which is pretty cool. So this is the kind of card that, is a sideboard card that has some pretty specific use cases, but we're very, very good in those. Good against Atraxa also, which is kind of cool. So yeah, this card will definitely see sideboard play, probably across almost all formats. In 10 years, this might be one of the most impactful cards in the set because of that. Even though it's not a particularly exciting card, But yeah, pretty cool card if for constructed. For limited, it's not really a card you probably ever play. But for constructed, this is a pretty serious sideboard card. Keep an eye out for it. Due Diligence, the mana for a common aura enchant creature. When it ETBs, target creature you control other than this creature gets +2/+2 in Vigilance, and the enchanted creature gets +2/+2 in Vigilance. So pretty cool, like, power pumping aura for limited. This puts a lot of power in play. So I go 2-drop, 3-drop. On turn 4, I cast this. You're slamming the red zone for a lot of damage, but of course, it is just an aura. You know, +2/+2 for 3 is not particularly exciting, and there isn't really any, like, aura synergy in the set or anything like that. So this is probably like a limited filler card. But it's kind of cool. You know, a little, if you're hyper aggressive, this card does fit that kind of hyper aggressive role in limited. Essence of Antiquity.
Oh my god, Becky.
5 mana for a 1/10. A 1/10. I don't have a big butt of a word. Artifact creature Golem, it is Disguise, so you can morph it face down for 3 with ward, and then pay 3 to flip it up. Whenever it's turn face up, creatures you control gain hexproof on a turn, and then untap them. So, pretty cool defensive morph. Obviously, this will block everything and live forever, basically. And then, you know, hexproof's kind of a cool trick. Definitely a reasonable, if somewhat unexciting, limited card. You know, fine trick. Untapping your creatures is also pretty cool, too. So, very reasonable limited card. Doesn't really fit any of the themes in a set for the most part. But fine limited card, pretty good trick. Constructed, obviously not. Moving on. Forum Familiar. What the hell is that cat eating? That's gross. 1 mana for a 1/1 catch with Disguise. It's a 1/1, Disguise 2. Whenever it's turned face up, return another permanent you control to its owner's hand and put a counter on this. So this is an interesting morph card that you would never, ever, ever play face up. Because a 1/1 for 1 with no abilities is just awful. But that being said, you morph this thing, and you can flip it at some point for 2 mana. You get a 2/2, which is a reasonable body, and you get to bounce your own stuff to protect it, or maybe retrigger an ETB. So pretty cute little morph for constructed. I mean, for limited, definitely not a constructed card, obviously, but for limited, this card's certainly reasonable. And you'll notice in this set, a lot of the morphs are based on abilities and things they do, not just sizing. You know, in Khan's Tarkir, every morph was like a 5 to flip, 4/5, 5/5, you know, 4/4, 5/6, whatever. Just all about sizing. This set, the morphs, Disguise cards are much more about abilities. So, reasonable limited card. It's kind of cool. Gryphonaut Tracker. 4 mana for a 3/2 flyer. When it ETBs, exile 2 cards from a graveyard. We've come a long way from a 3/2 flyer for 3 being a good limited card. So this is a very, very fringe body. That being said, there is some graveyard stuff in the set. So the exile is not super irrelevant. It's also a detective, but this is limited filler. You know, almost like a sideboard material for your limited deck. 3/2 flyer with no real upside aside from some sideboard stuff is not so great. Haazda?
You're saying it wrong.
Haazda?
It's Leviosa.
Vigilante, 5 mana common, 4/4 giant soldier. Whenever it ETBs or attacks, put a +1/+1 counter on a creature you control, power 2 or less. I think this card's actually kind of awesome. Obviously, a 4/4 for 5 is not super exciting. It's the card I would want to have 4 of in my deck. But as far as like a top end curve for your aggro deck, you have to play this, buff a creature, and then just keep buffing things as the game goes on. This is, you know, it's kind of filler level, but it's a solid limited card, I think. You know, I would want to take this card highly ever, but I would be super sad to put this in my deck. Inside Source. Uh-oh. Look at our Bombin Common, folks. 3 mana for a 1/1 human citizen. When it ETBs, make a 2/2 white and blue detective creature token. So, there's a lot of his 2/2 blue and white detective creature token in the set. And again, the blue-white theme is all about detectives. We've already seen a few ways to reset this, which is kind of awesome. So you can just keep getting more tokens. You can tap 3 and tap this to give it a detective you control. +2/+7 Vigilance on a turn as a sorcery. So this is a 1/1 and a 2/2 for 3, which is already a pretty solid rate. And then this has the ability to just kind of keep upping your guys so you can get them in. So a lot of the detectives in the set are 2/2s. So a 4/2 Vigilance is a thing you can't really ignore. You got to block it. So being able to hump your things with the late game is kind of cool. It's 2 creatures in 1. I think this card's great. Looks pretty simple, but a very, very solid limited card. Bombin Common for white. There might be a better common than like their removal spell, but I think this card's super awesome. It'd be very, very important. Just your average, like, you know, 2/2 and a 1/1 for 3 is almost always good and limited. And there's a lot of upside here too. Inside Source, Bombin Common for white. Karlov Watchdog. 4 mana for a 3/2 with Vigilance. Permanents your opponent's control can't be turned face up during your turn. Whenever you attack with 3 or more creatures, Creatures you control get +1/+1 to end of turn. So the abilities here are kind of cool, but the body is just awful. A 3/2 for 4 is almost completely unplayable. Just like, doesn't attack well, doesn't block well. Attacking with 3 more creatures is not an easy trigger to hit. And then limiting your opponent's morph abilities on your turn is kind of cool. But at this rate, I don't think it's worth it. So I think this card's pretty bad. At 3 mana, this is a super solid limited card. At 4 mana, I think this is pretty unexciting and won't make your draft deck most of the time. Crad Honch. 1 mana for an artifact, food, equipment. This is +2/+0, equipped for 2. Pay 2, sack it, gain 3, so it's a food. Whenever it's put into a graveyard in the battlefield, you may pay 2. If you do, make 2 1/1 white dog tokens. So you have kind of a weird, like, equipment that's also a food, that's also a sack outlet for tokens. It's cheap. It equips for reasonably cheap. I think we would prefer if it costs 2 and equip for 1. But then you also have the ability to just like 4 mana, gain 3, make 2 tokens with this, and instant speed, which is kind of cool. I don't know, seems pretty good. Honestly, seems like a pretty reasonable card. Does a lot of little things right. A lot of words for short, but reasonable limited card. Make your move. The mana for an instant, destroy target artifact, enchantment, or creature power 4 greater. Man, they keep making these limited cards more and more flexible. Usually this card costs 4 or has less modes, but this is probably a main deckable card. There are enough artifacts and enchantments, and then obviously there are big creatures too. So I think this card is a reasonable limited sideboard card with potential fringe outside constructed applications, but probably not. Just, you know, fringe limited card. Power creep and limit is pretty crazy these days. Makeshift binding. The minute for an enchantment when it ETBs, exile a creature until it goes away. Gain 2 life. This is your bread and butter. Limited removal spell in white. Not good enough for constructed, is worse than the O-ring effects, but gaining 2 life is good. Don't discount that. So kill a thing, gain 2 life. I mean, outside shot and constructed, probably not, but good limited card. Probably, you know, one of the best white commons. Just good removal spell. Very reasonable. Market Watch Phantom. 2 mana for a 2/2 Spirit Detective. Whenever another creature of power 2 or less ETBs under your control, this gains flying. I'm surprised there aren't. There isn't a keyword for this mechanic. It's very commonly seen. Just like if a creature of power 2 or less ETBs, do something. It's like, you know, why is this a mechanic? But great 2-drop. 2-drops that get evasion naturally are usually awesome, and it's also a detective too. So very, very solid 2-drop. I think this card's excellent. Probably a very, very high pick in draft. Museum Nightwatch. 4 mana for a 3/2. When it dies, make it 2/2 detective. Has disguise too. I think this card's also excellent. Play it, block with it, trade, get a 2/2. It's card advantage on a card. You can morph it also, just great. So you can morph it to trigger your 2 power effects or whatever. Also morphs in general. This is I think probably one of the top 5 white commons. A super, super solid card. Card's great. Good limited card. Neighborhood Guardian. 2 mana for a 2/2 uncommon. Whenever another creature power 2 or less ETBs. I'll call it Weenie Fall, maybe? Weenie Fall? Target creature you control is +1/+1 on turn. So it's kind of underwhelming for an uncommon, despite being a reasonable card. Just a bear, you play a creature on turn 3, make it a 3/3 attack. That's reasonable. Not the most exciting card, but definitely a reasonable 2-drop for white and limited. No Witnesses. Wrath of God. Get them all out of here.
Get off my plane.
Get them out. 4 mana Wrath of God, and the player who controls the most creatures investigates. So 4 mana Wrath with your opponent investigates is going to be the most common use case, obviously. There already are a lot of good Wraths in the format, so I don't know if this card is necessary. Depopulate means they might draw naturally or might not. This means they got to put mana into a clue, obviously. And then, of course, Sunfall is much, much better. That being said, definitely a playable constructed card. Reasonable. In limited, it's a little better than a Wrath is normally because it can draw a card, but not nearly as good as a card like Sunfall or some card that leaves stuff in play. But fringe constructed card, I think Wraths are overrated in limited, but still a pretty good limited card. Not on my watch. I like this card a lot. 2 mana for an instant, exile target attacking creature. We've never seen this effect so cheap before. But this is quite good. No caveats. No special use cases, just 2 mana, exile an attacker, doesn't need to be tapped, it's exiled, not destroyed. This card will definitely see play constructed. I think this card's super solid, and then in limited, this card's also just phenomenal. Just A+ card, love it. Easy card to overlook, but very, very solid. Up next is Novice Inspector. Three Inspector's back, baby. 1 mana for a human detective. 1/2 ETB investigate. Effectively the exact same card as Three Inspector, but it adds the detective creature type. So it is technically better because there are detective synergies in the set overall. But this card's great. This card's going to be huge. In Pioneer, this gives you access to 8 Inspectors in your Convoke decks. In Standard, this card plays really, really well with the Lethal Demolition, which is awesome. It's also human. It's also a detective. It's cheap. This is the kind of card that's super, super easy to overlook, but don't. Card's great. Really, really solid card. We'll see a lot of play. Very good in Limited. A little worse than it is constructed, I think, because it's a synergy, but still a great card. Novice Inspector, best in show, and that's awesome. Moving on. On the Job. 4 mana for an instant. Pump the team, +2/+1, instant speed, investigate. Investigate's a pretty weird ability to put on a card like this. So this is obviously a limited card. This is a limited card that's usually going to end the game the turn you cast it, right? I draft a bunch of crappers, I attack with everything, you block 2 of them, I cast this, you're dead. So putting Investigate in this card doesn't make a lot of sense because you're hopefully not gonna use that clue to draw any cards. So this is about the same as it is if it didn't have the Investigate ability. It's obviously better because it does. But that being said, I don't think it moves the needle that much. This is just kind of a fringe archetype specific card for limited, and otherwise not very exciting. Perimeter Enforcer. It's meant for a 1/1 flying lifelink. Whenever another detective enters the battlefield under your control, and whenever a detective is turned face up, this gets +1/+1 to end of turn. This is a pretty good draft card. Play on turn 2. You just play a detective every turn, and attack for 2, gain 2, attack for 2, gain 2. 2/2 lifelink is pretty sweet. Doesn't block very well, and again, won't always be on. So like, I don't think this is that much better than just like a 2/2 lifelink for 2, which is usually a very good common, to be totally fair. But yeah, I think pretty solid limited card overall, as long as you'll be able to trigger it fairly often. So kind of like a blue-white, secret card, because blue-white's all about detectives. Sanctuary Wall is next. Meant for an 0/4 wall. Pay 3, tap a creature. You may stun it if you do stun this. Kind of cool, because an 0/4 wall for 2 is reasonable, right? That's not like, that's pretty reasonable rate. And 3 mana for a tap is very clunky for limited. That's a lot to tap a creature. But this sort of just does it twice, right? So you can tap it and then sort of preemptively use it to tap the creature next turn also, which is kind of cool. I think this card's going to play better than it looks. I think it's very easy to see 3 mana tap a creature and go, oh my god, that's so much mana. But I think that the stun part's kind of cool, and then the body is reasonable enough. I think if you're a defensive limited deck, this card's reasonable and limited. Constructed, obviously not, but solid limited card. Seasoned Consultant. It's meant for a 1/3 detective. Whenever you attack with this and 2 more creatures, get +2/+0. Reasonable limited card. 1/3 that can buff is kind of cool. It's also a detective, which is kind of cool. It's got 1 or less power, or 2 less power for triggers on that stuff too. So solid 2-drop. Nothing super exciting. Wouldn't take it super high, but solid limited card. 10th District Hero. What a difference rarity makes, right? We go from a common 1/3 with 1 ability for 2 to a rare 2/3 for 2 with 2 abilities. So we got a human here. It's 2/3 for 2, which is a decent base rate. And then we have 2 mana, Collect Evidence 2. What the hell is Collect Evidence?
Onward and downward.
Collect Evidence is an ability. It's a cost. And Collect Evidence means to exile a card or cards from your graveyard with a mana value of X or more. So Collect Evidence 2 means go in your graveyard and grab any number of cards that have mana value 2 or more, and you may exile those to pay for the cost. So 2 mana, exile a card or cards that cost 2 or more, and then this thing will become a human detective 4/4 and Vigilance. So pretty good, honestly. Obviously, Collect Evidence 2 is not too difficult to hit. It's just literally like 1/2 drop or whatever. And then 2 mana, boom, now it's a 4/4 Vigilance, which is pretty good. Honestly, it's very reasonable. And then 3 mana and Collect Evidence 4. If you leveled it up once, it'll turn into Mileva? I'm always saying it wrong.
You're saying it wrong.
Whatever. A legendary 5/5 that gains other creatures you control have indestructible. So this card, I think, is going to play worse than it reads, because it reads pretty well, right? You play this thing, 2 mana pump it, now it's 4/4. 3 mana pump it, now it's 5/5. All things are indestructible. The problem is that most human-y kind of beat down white weenie decks don't typically put cards in their graveyard super effectively. You know, they are users playing creatures. You know, creatures might die, they might not, but not the easiest to use. So the floor here is fine. A 2/3 for 2 is reasonable, and then obviously isn't that hard to make it a 4/4. But I think this card is like, you know, fringe, playable, constructed. Not the most exciting overall, just fine. Obviously a phenomenal limited card. You know, 2/3 for 2 with upside's phenomenal. But for constructed, I think this is like, you know, and then you have the problem also of like, you sink 2, 4, 5, 6, 7 mana into it and exile 6 mana worth of cards from your graveyard, and it protects all your other creatures, and then they just kill this. Right? Like, so, I don't know. I think this card's mostly good for the first ability, just 2 mana, and then 2 mana make it a 4/4. But I think fringe, constructed, great limited card. Unyielding Gatekeeper, 2 mana for a 3/2 with Disguise 2. It's a rare elephant cleric. Whenever it's turned face up, exile another target non-land permanent. If you controlled it, blink it. Otherwise, they get a 2/2. This card's pretty good, right? So this is not a brutal Cathar, because this is exiling things forever, and then they just get a 2/2 immediately. It's sort of like a Skyclave apparition, but they get the token front facing. That being said, it's still, 3 mana to play and then 2 mana to flip. So 5 mana overall to exile, something they still get value also. I think this card's pretty good, but I think this is the kind of card where like you're going to put it into your deck and you're going to cast it as a 3/2 on turn 2 a lot, which is not ideal. And the token trades with it, which is also not particularly great. So like if you're going to spend 5 mana just to exile something, why not just spend 5 mana to exile something, right? Just like play some removal spell, So I think this card it's fine. I think it's kind of solid. It's kind of cute to have a decently costed disguise card to mix it up a little bit. But yeah, okay, we'll probably see a little constructed play. Great limited card, obviously. But overall, I think it's going to play a little worse than it looks. But that's the card. Wojek Investigator. We have a rare 2/4 for 3 with flying and vigilance. So obviously already an awesome limited card because those stats are great. Beginning of your upkeep, investigate once for each opponent who has more cards in hand with you than you. So pretty sweet card, right? It's an angel and a detective. Both those have some relevance. Doesn't die to cut down, which is pretty cool as well. Vigilance blocks well, attacks well. And then if you're just lesser on hands than your opponent, make some freaking clues, So because it could be a player in Angels. Giada is still legal in Standard as well, which is kind of cool. So reasonable card, reasonable stats, reasonable ability. May not find a home in Constructed, but the rate is certainly there. And then phenomenal limited card. And then we come to Wrench. What do I say about Wrench? There's one equipment in each color that's like a clue weapon. This flavor-wise goes too far for me. All right, I get it. It's the clue set. I think the themes and motif of the set are pretty fun, actually. But this is just hitting me over the head with a wrench. This is too much, but whatever. Wrench, 1 mana equipment. It's a clue. Equip creature gets +1/+1. Has vigilance and 3 to tap a creature. Pay 2, sack it, draw a card. Equip for 2. The floor here is certainly reasonable. 1 mana for 2 sack, draw, equipment. I think this is like a fringe limited card. The tap's kind of clunky. +1/+1 for 2 mana is not great. It does a lot of things, but none particularly well. I think overall, just, a limited card. So to recap, white, our best in show, was Novice Inspector. Our sleeper card, Case of the Uneaten Feast. Our trap card, Assemble the Players. And our Bombin Common is Inside Source. That's white, folks. All right, we're all done white. Blue is next, but you two folks, like us, if you enjoy this, please like the video, leave a comment, subscribe. It helps a ton. Seriously. If you enjoy content from me or any content creator you might watch and you want to support them, just like every video. Hit play, like on every video. Don't think twice about it because it costs you nothing and it gives us everything. All right, thanks so much. I'll see you in blue, YouTube folks. Peace.